Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 4th, 2021, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, for 30 minutes.
Tonight we're going to address three what I consider key issues that have sadly been left largely untouched by the American media. The first one is the penalties against married couples in income transfer payments and the degree to which these income transfer payments are going to be affected by the Build Back Better bill if any of that survives for passage at the end of the year. We know that Karl Marx wanted to destroy the American family. And we know for a while last year, Black Lives Matter, which was so important in last year's campaign, had on their website that they wanted to destroy the Western prescribed nuclear family. As a practical matter, this means they wanted to keep the man out of the house. People might wonder why I keep bringing this up, and it seems like old news. I would feel better if some Democrats stepped forward and publicly condemned Marxism and publicly praised the idea that children may benefit from having a father at home, but that's not going on. In America, before Lyndon Johnson came in with his Great Society or War on Marriage or whatever you want to call it, only all but 7% of American children started out with both parents. Now, I know wonderful single parents. I know children who became wonderful adults raised by single parents. But nevertheless, the statistics again and again show whatever metric you have, you might be better off, or it might be easier to raise that child with two parents at home. After the Gingrich reforms in the 90s, that number has since stayed at about 40% of children are born without parents at home. So it went from 7% to 40%, a steady increase 35 years after Lyndon Johnson passed his War on Marriage bills in the 60s. Things have been relatively static for the last 25 years. Now, the reason in my opinion, the reason the number of families with both parents at home dropped is because most government transfer payments are conditioned upon not having a lot of income or not having a major breadwinner in the house. There are about 90 government transfer payments this is true of, but some of the ones that the average person should be aware of: SNAP, the food stamp program, the low-income housing program, the earned income tax credit program, the Pell Grants, I don't mention the TANF program. All of these programs are designed to disappear if you have a person who makes an average income in the household. In Build Back Better, the earned income tax credit goes up. Joe Biden increased the food stamp benefits on his own, and there will be large increases in the amount of low-income housing available. I want to point out one of the programs, by the way, that we use to build more low-income housing. It's called Section 42 housing. It's funded by very generous tax credits, which come from obviously very wealthy property developers. As a practical matter, the government winds up paying for over 80% of the housing that a private person gets through the tax credits. So one of the primary benefits of this form of low-income housing is we are, quite frankly, making the rich richer. You know, it's one of the big tax benefits that helps the wealthier people. Because Section 42, so much of the housing is paid for by the government, the person who does the building has every incentive to make that property as expensive as it can be. we're glad the chair is listening here because it's something I didn't know about till about 6 years ago. It creates a situation in which a developer who is building low-income housing can outbid another developer for prime land, and they can build, fancier countertops, that sort of thing, because the government's paying for 80% of it. So if you're somebody like me who sometimes thinks our tax code does benefit the ultra wealthy, Section 42 is one of their provisions. Pell Grants are another example of a program that you can benefit from, either you or your children, provided nobody in the household is making too much money. And it's another program, therefore, designed, as one mother told me, me and my husband worked, my poor kids have to take out such big student loans. Is it fair we're penalized for being married and working? And that's the way that program is set up. We're designed to penalize the old-fashioned family, which is what Karl Marx would have wanted. It's not unusual to have situations in which the penalty for getting married can be as much as $14,000. And like I said, as we have more low-income housing, as we up the earned income tax credit, these programs are pushing, I think, America in the wrong direction. I will direct people who are listening to recent studies that have been put out by the Heritage Foundation and Robert Rector, who's long been an expert in this field, describing the degree to which the penalty on people who get married goes up. Now, I would hope for children in the future we don't continue down this path of apparently penalizing both parents for staying in the home. I hope it's something that's looked at by Republicans if we get the majority, and I hope more Democrats look into this before we add too many other benefits conditioned upon a low-income situation if Build Back Better is passed. And again, I think it would be good if the press, which hasn't so far, but I would hope the press would pick up on Mr. Rector's paper and comment on how America will change if more and more benefits are targeted at people who are not married with children. I think this is one of the key stories in America over the last 50 years. I hear a lot of people back home when they feel that America is not quite as an enjoyable place to live in 50 years ago, that one of those reasons is what they would refer to as the breakdown of the traditional family. And I hope after hearing my explanation tonight, more people realize that that was not necessarily by accident. There are evil left-wing people who want to break down the family, and the public policy of the American government right now is to use their financial incentives to penalize the average family. Now, the next issue that I think, if we look 15 years down the road, and I always think when we take up issues or address issues or decide how to vote issues, we should say, how is this going to affect America not only today, but 15 years from now? I do believe that the screwed up welfare system continues to chip away at America. But I would say the second biggest, maybe the biggest issue, is what's going on at our southern border. Earlier today, I had a chance to talk to a member of the Border Patrol who appeared here in the Capitol. And having seen the border 5 times last year, I thought I had my fill of bad things that are going on. But talking to him as far as what's going on right now, it is worse than ever. They are seeing more people, more drug gangs operating near the border. We are at a point in which we are not only seeing Mexican drug gangs hanging out in California, fighting for the marijuana fields that are apparently popping up in California, but they are now fighting with Chinese gangs. I mean, I've been down there several times. I've yet to see him. But this Border Patrol agent told me what we have going on in California is violent conflict between Mexican gangs and Chinese gangs. And they're becoming more aggressive. You didn't used to see people coming at the border shooting at Border Patrol agents. But that's what we're getting now. I mean, in the past when I've been down there, they'd avoid the Border Patrol agents. But now you really have to look out. And I mention that because I think as we work our way through a continuing resolution today and we work towards the budget, we had better do something to help out the Border Patrol. The Border Patrol right now has to deal with a lot more people than they did a year ago. When President Biden took office, there were about 20,000 people coming across here every month. We're now at about 90,000 every month, including a lot more unaccompanied children. Obviously, when people turn themselves in at the southern border, which they do under our silent policy, the Border Patrol agents have to drop what they're doing, ignore the border, and do the paperwork. There's even more paperwork when we have unaccompanied minors coming to the southern border, because then we have to check out the young children and we ship them around the country wherever they have to go. Now, this drives the Border Patrol up the wall, right? Because if somebody in this room took their children and dropped them off at the Washington, D.C. airport and just told the Southwest ticket agent, oh, here's Johnny, send him to somebody in Portland, Oregon, social services would be after those people. Why are you letting those people go? But at the southern border, it doesn't work that way. If Johnny shows up at the southern border and he has written on his T-shirt, you know, I want to go to 14 East Elm Street, Portland, Oregon, we deliver him to 14 Elm Street, South Oregon. No questions asked. We don't, I mean, presumably, Johnny knows those people. Hopefully it's an aunt and uncle. Hopefully it's grandparents. Hopefully it's somebody. But we don't know for sure. Recently there's been a report that the U.S. government will lose track of 1 in 3 unaccompanied alien children it releases to sponsors in the country. We don't even know where these kids are at. But I don't know, for whatever reason, maybe it's, you know, they like the current administration. They're not banner headlines about this, but there should be banner headlines about it. I mean, like I said, if it were our own children just released to the airlines to go around the country, we would be concerned. I've been at the southern border. I've watched as I flew out of McAllen, Texas, and watched all the people getting on the airplane, children getting on the airplane, and people getting on the plane without identification. Again, you and I might have to turn in our driver's license. Here I am. Can you let me get back to Milwaukee? That's not the way it works with the illegal immigrants. They're let in. A recipe for trouble. But the one primary thing I took out today was the, again, large number of people coming in the country. And I should point out, too, and this says maybe something about the administration's motivation. In the first 6 months of last year, about 85% less people were deported than 3 years ago. Some of that can be attributed to the COVID, but we largely know how to deal with the COVID today. So you begin to get even more suspicious of the administration of not only are they greatly increasing the number of people who come in the country, but they are dramatically decreasing the number of people with criminal records who are being deported from the country. How can America survive? And again, when I look at Congress, when I look what we should do, I say, what effect is this going to have over the next 15 years? And we are right now accepting people who we know very little about. I mentioned they don't need IDs. The last time I was down at the southern border, you looked at a path, which is maybe as wide as this table. It was littered with IDs as people from wherever, Venezuela, Colombia, Chile, wherever, throw their IDs out, I guess because they want to start a new life and don't want the American government to know who they are, I guess. And that is how we are changing America. That is how we are determining who the new people coming into America are. Rather than, if we really want to, rather than doing something under the current system where people have to check in, where people are monitored, where there's some vetting process. Why you would do it this way if you cared about the future of America, I don't know. And I felt more sorry than ever for some of the people in California who are having these drug gangs buy up houses, sometimes at heightened rates, but are also buying up houses that they are using for their operations. And of course, very quickly, those neighborhoods change if you have drug cartels owning houses in a given area. Now, I'm going to address one final issue tonight, and I'm a little frustrated at the media not bringing it up. As I've said before, I'm not the most hawkish person on the Ukraine-Russian situation. But since Russia and Ukraine are in the news, you would figure the media, including the conservative media, which hasn't been that loud about it, but any impartial media person would take it upon themselves to talk about the Ukrainian famine. In the early 1930s, Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union controlled what happened in the Ukraine. And they were mad at the Ukraine because some people in Ukraine wanted to be independent and hadn't been under the communist heel enough. Ukraine was a very wealthy region as far as agriculture was concerned. So in order to punish the Ukrainians or make sure the Soviet Union took over the Ukraine, they instituted a famine. They wouldn't let Ukrainians leave the country. They took over the crops in the Ukraine. It dramatically differs if you look up the numbers, but somewhere between, say, 4 and 15 million people starved to death in the Ukraine in the early 1930s. Now, isn't that news? If you were a well-informed, well-read American who went to middle school, went to high school, maybe did some college, shouldn't you know that? When 4 to 14 million Ukrainians were starved to death by the Soviet Union in the early 30s. But I talk to people in this building, I talk to people back home, somehow nobody knows it. Well, maybe that has something to do with some of the animosity between Ukrainians and the Russians. And regardless, it's something every American should know, so they know why people like me are a little bit concerned when we are nice to groups founded by Marxists, or when a U.S. Senator from Connecticut shows up at an anniversary for the Communist Party of America and thinks it's no big deal and we can just laugh it off. There are many, many things wrong with communism. Their suppression of free speech and the free flow of ideas is one of the things that's scary. That it's not uncommon in places like Red China or the Soviet Union early on to wipe out all houses of worship is something that we find scary, as well as complete government control of the economy and a situation in which they determine that your success economically will to a certain extent be dependent upon following the line and bowing to the government. I cannot imagine a worse form of government than that of communism. It's horrible even without the mass murders, but every American child should know about the great Ukrainian famine of 31 and 32 and the millions of people who died, both so they are knowledgeable in Marxism or communism and to know a little bit about historic Ukrainian-Russian relations. So I beg our media to recount what happened, be a good time to recount what happened for the American public, and hope in the future members of the American education system do a little bit better job of explaining some of the horrific things that happened in history. I'd like to thank you very much, and if you want, we can adjourn.
Does the gentleman yield back?
Yes.